zoom here, share. All right, so hopefully everyone's back and viewing the presentation. If anybody is not seeing things, let me know. Apologize for the technical problems here. Fortunately, we're almost done. So what I was getting to here is that in Vensim, we've got these lookup tables. We've got the easy lookup tables that we just covered here, but I also wanted to cover the more advanced lookup tables because when you go into that, you see that the type under auxiliary can also be lookup. And so what's that all about? And so if you go under lookup here, then the way lookup works is you can define a table. Uh, so I guess I'll maybe open up Vensim. And maybe I've got, well, I guess I can just create a variable. And so if I look at a single variable and under this, I set it to lookup, I can click as graph and create a lookup table just like before. But this doesn't take any inputs. It's just a function. So basically, when you just say lookup, what you're doing is you're defining a variable that functions just as a lookup table. And so the way you use that then, as we go through in the example here, is you can actually use it as an input to another object. So in this particular case, I was able to use net regeneration as a lookup table. And then when I go into new fish per year, then net regeneration shows up down here as an input. So the lookup table itself, like a function, is, if I go back, is wired up to new fish per year. So I've got net regenerations wired up. It's coming in from the side. And then fish density comes in and they converge. And then inside new fish per year, I can use net regeneration like a function. And so you can say net regeneration fish density. And so this can be useful if you would like to have your model switch between different lookup tables, as an example, because you can sort of have one under new fish per year, you can kind of imagine that they always is going to have this relationship, but maybe you've got some other logic down here that chooses which lookup table it's actually sending the new fish per year. So it's kind of advanced. I don't think this will ever be useful for most of your models, but I want to show it off just because it's going to be very tempting when you go into building lookup tables to change the type to lookup. So in most cases, change the type to auxiliary and the subtype to with lookup. If you change the type to lookup, what you're doing is you're telling Vensim you want to build a model like this one, where net regeneration comes in as like a function, and then fish density comes in as that function's argument, and then inside the rate, you combine the function and the argument. So it's a little more advanced, but I just want to put it out there because that's what this type lookup is all about and why you probably want to avoid type lookup and focus on subtype with lookup. And then you can get the same output. All right, now the last advanced thing that I want to mention is that sometimes in Vensim, you want to make a lookup table that represents time, like a relationship with time. So I've given this example here of an interest rate. So I've got an interest rate that might change over time, and that is going into a model of a bank. And so I want to go into interest rate and make it a lookup table that where I define that maybe in January it's this interest rate, in February it's this other interest rate, and so on. And so the way I do that is I go into my my interest rate here, and I could put a constant interest rate, and then under interest, I can say I want that fixed interest rate times my savings account balance. That's what's coming in down here. And then my savings account balance is as that stock. And so here's what it would look like with the constant interest rate. So that's like our basic example. So how do we get this interest rate to change over time? Well, what I can do is go up to this new thing that we've never used before in InSim called shadow variable. And if I click on that shadow variable in Vensim, it gives me a list of these variables here, and one of them is time. Notice that any variables I've created also show up in there. A shadow variable basically allows you to use a variable that is elsewhere in the model without having to draw a long wire from wherever it was in the model to here. And so that's what we're doing with this. But if we wanted to link test in, then that shadow variable would basically allow us to wire test in to things near wherever we wanted that shadow variable to be. But these other things are variables that are hidden within the model that we can get access to. So I can create a shadow variable for time. And then that shadow variable, which see it's got this kind of gray mark here. If maybe I can make this a little bigger. Then I have to find the handle and drag it out. So now I can then wire up time as an input to test. And then if I were to look at the test here, it shows up down here under as time. And so if I change test back to auxiliary with lookup, and then I say under my equations, I'm going to put in time. And then under lookup, I can say as graph. And basically the independent variable now is time. And then the dependent variable is whatever I want my interest to be at any given time. And so I go through this example here in the presentation where I say shadow variables are aliases. So time is something that we can get access to through the shadow variable. And so now I can create under my variable interest rate a lookup table, which is a lookup table of time. And that lookup table here, notice that I go from 0 to 48 because I've defined time in my model in terms of months. And so the time variable is just going to give me a number. What month am I simulating? And what this lookup table says is from month 0 to 11.83, it's going to be this interest rate here. And so I defined both 0 and 11.83. And then from 11.93 to 24.0. So this is basically for the first year, it's going to be this interest rate. For the second year, it's going to be this interest rate. For the third year, it's going to be this interest rate. You can see it stepping through there. And so I can then take that and simulate. And now I can see that if I'm simulating, my savings account balance is this one in red. My interest is this one in blue, and then my variable interest rate is this green here. And so I can see that the variable interest rate and the interest generated changes over time. And that causes this growth curve to not be a nice exponential growth, but it has these corners where it grows kind of linearly, and then it flattens out, and then it starts growing again, and so on. So that's a way for me to make variables change over time. So before I get into how to do that on Insight Maker, are there questions for how we use those shadow variables and the lookup tables in Vensim? I'll give people time to type. And it turns out we can do all this in Insight Maker. So that's what we're about to see as well. And it's arguably a little easier in Insight Maker. All right, so in Insight Maker, under the primitives, we've got this add converter, which is underneath add variable, and it creates this different shaped object, and it's purely for doing these lookup tables. So if we add a converter in, then we can say a bunch of options here in the converter, and we'll get into what those options mean, but the defaults here I think are linear. And notice the input source by default, they take time, which was a shadow variable, in as an input, but we can convert that or change that so that it can take other variables as an input. And then we've got our data, which is basically those points. But we've got graphical ways to specify all of this stuff. So time is available for an input source, so we don't create a shadow variable to time. If we want to do a converter based on time, we just specify time right here. And then under interpolation, if we want to specify points and have it to create lines between them, like Vensim does by default, and like they did in Moorcroft's textbook, we set this thing to linear. Now we're going to see that there's another mode that allows these things to just go flat from whatever the previous point is to create stair steps. So that if you're in Vensim to create stair steps, we have to create a lookup table that specifies every point, the beginning point and the end point. But if we turn off this linear mode, it'll automatically just connect every point with a flat line to the next point, and so you'll get these jumps, and we'll see what that looks like here in a second. So if I set it to interpolation, that's what I was saying, I get these jumps. So I specify these points, just like in Vensim, but instead of connecting them with a straight line, it uses horizontal lines to connect them. And so I can then build the exact same model using these tools in Insight Maker, and I can see my variable interest rate is changing over time. And with that, I see the growth of the money in the bank account isn't a nice, simple exponential. It has all these variable rates. And so it's kind of like a tiny exponential, then an exponential different rate, then an exponential different rate, and so on. And then like I was saying, I don't have to make the interest rate depend on time. I can wire up something else to it. And then when I click on the interest rate in the left-hand side, I can then specify that I should make the independent variable whatever I wired up to it. So in this case, I can make the balance be the input. And then that would allow me to define an interest rate based on the amount of money you have in the bank. So if you have very little amount in the bank, maybe they give you this interest rate. As you start growing the amount you have in the bank, they give you higher and higher interest rates until you get a critical amount where they drop your interest rate to very low. So this would be, now I'm basing the variable interest rate on a state variable. So it sort of made things endogenous here, so I don't have to worry about time coming in. And then that allows me to then get a simulation where I can see the interest rate is changing over time as the money changes over time. So as the money grows, the interest rate initially grows until the money hits a critical value, and then the interest rate falls. And then that change, so you get fast growth of the money initially, and then slower growth as the interest rate falls with the increasing money. So there are questions on how to implement these two types of converters, these lookup tables in Insight Maker or in Vensim. All right, so looking forward, we are at about time here. So lecture E4, so next week so not next week spring break. The week after that, we'll have lecture E2 and E3. And E3, that's when we start introducing some more interesting models like epidemic models. And so we still have some preliminaries to get through in E2. And then after we've covered all of that, then we're going to see Moorcroft's take on all of this stuff, and that's E4. So that's basically that chapter is going to be due a week after the Tuesday after spring break. So it's a good idea to start reading that, but you've got plenty of time for that. So I still would like to see a muddiest point for this week. We've got again that reading exercise, but that's due for a while. And then I want to see the project, your names of your team members due Saturday night on Canvas. If I remember correctly, I actually set this to the end of spring break. So double check that on Canvas, but I think by the end of spring break, Jacob. For some reason, I am not hearing you. Let me make sure my volume's up here. Oh, I see. Oh, I'm sorry. Got you. You've got it typed in here. Is there a minimum or maximum number of people to be in a group? Do we have to have 4 people in a group? Can it be 3? So if you have a really good argument for 3, I might, so these are 2 questions that came in. I'm shooting for 4 people. Originally, that limitation to 4 was because we only had so much time in class to do the presentations. I still would like to go with 4 because that's been a pretty good number. But now that we're doing presentations online, I'm a little less constrained. So if you really have a hard time finding a fourth person, I might be able to be okay with three, but email me because I want to limit the number of three-person groups because it still takes time to grade these reports and we only have finals week to grade them. And so I want to kind of keep the number of reports to a manageable number. And so if everybody did a three-person group, that's going to add a couple of extra reports to grade. So shoot for four. We're going to go for four. That's the ideal size. But with the number of students in the class, it's not a multiple of four. So I know that there's probably going to be, say, two three-person groups or something like that. So email me if you really can't find a fourth person. Otherwise, use the discussion boards if you're looking for a group or you're looking for a new member. I've turned on the People tab in Canvas, and so you can communicate directly with each other over that People tab as well. So please do that. And then once you form that group, then after so basically you'll have roughly a week after that to put together this one-page final project proposal. If you want more details on the format there, look online. So every member will submit this team name assignment where you'll submit all four team members, and that way I'll go through that, verify everybody's got the same members, and then create a group in Canvas. And then once you have your group created, then only one person needs to update the final project proposal, and the score for that will automatically go to all four, as with all the other deliverables except for the peer review, which happens at the end of the semester. Then the only other thing we have coming up, which you don't have to worry about till after spring break, but we're going to talk in lecture E2, we'll introduce delays, and then there'll be an assignment be introduced there, which will be due the end of that week after spring break. If you're interested in getting started on that, it's already available. It basically is going to take all of the three things we introduced here, and then delays, which we'll introduce in lecture E2, and put together a relatively simple model that allows you practice in building those. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end of lecture E2 to start on that, but definitely not a bad idea to get started ahead of time. So with that, any other questions before we turn it into the attendance exercise here? I really appreciate everyone's patience. And for the attendance exercise here, I'd like you to just give me, and I'm happy to get more extended feedback, but give me your rough impression of what you think of this experience if you had to do this, of giving the lectures on Zoom in this Zoom room. So if you just want to say great, or I hated it, or if you're going to give me something a little more advanced than that, then go to the URL that is here or use the QR code. Of course, you can't turn in a piece of paper to me, but if you really want to, you can also email this to me and I can count that as your paper response. But yeah, just generally give me some feedback. And again, it's okay if it's thumbs up or thumbs down. But otherwise, that's all I've got for you here. So I will stay online here for a couple more minutes if there's any questions. Otherwise, I'll see everybody after spring break, and I hope you have a wonderful spring break. And you can feel free to leave whenever you're ready. And then hopefully there was a question about, can we get a recording of this lecture? The hope was that there would be a recording of this lecture. I was recording the screen and all the audio, but when the computer died, I'm not sure if we're going to capture all of it. So we might get just the first half, or we might get just the second half. Hopefully we get the whole thing. So we're working on it. Zoom has the ability to record lectures, but when I did a test run, when I was flipping back and forth with Vensim, the video couldn't keep up, and so I had to record it a different way that wasn't on the cloud. And so hopefully I can get the video out to you, but this might be one of those rare cases where I don't have a video for this. But fortunately, there are tutorials on this that I've put online, and so check out those tutorials underneath this lecture on Canvas. And if you have trouble finding a group, I encourage you to just post on the discussion boards, and then I will try to draw everyone's attention to those discussion boards and post not only if you're looking for a group, but also if you're looking to add a group member. Then that's great for people to know. If you have three and you would say, yeah, it'd be great if we had a fourth person, then please be generous and say, we have three people, we're looking for a fourth. That would be great if you can post that on the discussion boards. All right, looks like that's about the end of things. And so I will be ending the meeting here shortly and see everybody later.